Welcome, John Psathas. It's a pleasure that you're meeting me here. I'm very happy to talk with you in the first edition of my composer talk on my YouTube channel. And it's very nice to have you here.
It's very nice to be here, Fabian.
John, you're a pianist and a composer. I want to talk with you about percussion repertoire. How did it come that from being pianist you're writing so much for percussion now? This is like your main thing, what you're writing for. What catched your attention on the percussion instruments?
You know, I think it's probably, to answer that, I need to just say what it is that excited me about writing music at the very beginning, and the kind of music that I was listening to, and what excited me. So I would listen to, when I was very young, you know, the Moonlight Sonata of Beethoven, but not the first movement, which everybody loves. But I would listen to the last movement, which is the exciting one with the fire and the virtuoso playing. And I would listen to recordings of Keith Jarrett improvising, where between the left and the right hand, it's absolutely incredible what he does. And I thinking back, I realize what excited me the most in music when I was young was how different parts interact with each other. And that could be different players within an ensemble, or it could be different layers within the same piece of music being played by one musician. But that sort of conversation and energy between parts and layers, it's really been the most exciting thing for me in music. And if you think about also that I'm drawn to fast, energetic, virtuosic music. And I like the way that very small interactions can happen at a very fast tempo. I find that very exciting. You know, you get it in fast jazz, you know, you get it in all kinds of music. Then it's kind of inevitable that I would work towards percussion, because firstly, percussionists, I think across all kind of genres, they tend to learn what they do by internalizing pulse, right? Because percussionists work so much with syncopation that they have to be able to move all around what's happening on a beat, but have the beat internalized.
Yeah.
And that means that if you're composing for people like that, it gives you a much greater freedom in thinking about rhythm and how different layers talk to each other and interact. And so if you go all the way back to one of the very first pieces I wrote, which is Matrices Dance, you know, which has had a great life. Really, that piece is all about the drums and the percussion moving around each other in this very tight, synchronized way. And it's interesting that I mentioned Keith Jarrett, because the idea of improvisation is very important to me. I don't improvise, and I hardly ever include improvisation in my writing. But in a piece like Matrices Dance, Drum Dances, you know, and a whole lot of pieces that I've written, there is this feeling of improvisation or spontaneity. But because I like that small interaction between things, that detailed level interaction, you have the sense of improvisation, but it could never happen by improvisation. You know, it's too organized.
Yeah.
And so if those are the things that really excite me, it's the percussion writing and the percussion players and those instruments that are going to give me the kind of the playground, you know, to explore these sorts of things. And the other thing about percussion too is that, you know, if you think of the short note percussion, so you think of snare drum, for instance, you know, no sustain. If you think of even the marimba, very short lifespan for every note, it doesn't last long. What it means is you can deliver a piece of information, which is a note, and then the instrument gets out of the way and you have space again for something else.
Yeah.
You know, if it's a stringed instrument or a wind instrument, whatever, there's a lot more to have to wait for before you do your next thing in terms of sound. And so percussion provides the best medium for fast, tight, clear sounding interaction at speed. So if you look at a piece like Kyoto, for me, that's a great representation of everything I'm talking about, because you have 5 instruments that are pretty much playing all the time. You know, it's like a permanent tutti, you know, this piece. And yet there is all of this space in the sound. I don't think you could have a string quintet where everybody is playing a lot of notes all of the time and have the opportunity to create something that is clear and you can hear all the detail of what's happening. So that's kind of the long answer. But then the other answer is the idea of groove. You know, that percussionists come out of a culture of groove, and all of their kind of listening, or much of their listening, is music that functions with a sense of groove. So whether it's jazz or the marching corps music that you have in America, you know, the drum corps music, the non-Western cultures, you know, like African percussion and South American percussion and so on. And I'm drawn to that as well. So not only am I not a percussionist, but I also never dance. No one has ever seen me dance in my life. And so I kind of have a very frustrated sense of groove inside me. And I think that percussion is what allows it to come out.
Writing music in general, not only for percussion, like how big is the influence from where you're coming, like from the Greek culture or from other cultures which are around Greece?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, you know, it's quite a complicated journey when you're the child of immigrants. And especially if you're the child of immigrants in a country that is so far away from everything. And so when I was growing up, I decided to be a composer when I was 11. You know, so I just knew, and that's all I've ever done. But the challenge was that in New Zealand, when I was 11, there was no clear musical history. Not for Western people, not for people from Europe or descended from Europe. We just had a kind of soup of everything. And so growing up here and writing music, I had no choice but to discover myself, to invent myself, you know, to sit and think, well, what do I want to hear? What do I want to write? There was no pressure to be like anything. And I think that must be very different if you're growing up in Italy or in Germany or in France, you know, where there are these huge classical traditions and you say, I'm going to be a composer because you're coming out of a history. But here it was, you say, I want to be a composer. And the first question anyone would ask is, well, what instrument will you play? And I'll say, well, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about writing music, not playing. And so, you know, what I'm saying is it was like floating in the middle of the ocean and you could go anywhere. You could go in any direction. So that's one part. So I was very free. That's what I'm trying to say. And then the other part, to answer your question, is I grew up in a very Greek house. You know, so language, I spoke Greek before I spoke English. We always ate Greek food. You know, it was all very Greek, and we listened to Greek music always in the house. And so I had strong influence there, but I was growing up in New Zealand, and that's the challenge of all immigrant children, is your house is like your homeland country, but then you step out of the front door and you're in a completely other country, and you go backwards and forwards many times a day. And so at the beginning, I did try as a composer to fit in, you know, to conform. And so you know, of course I was listening to everything that was then, like Ligeti and Lutoslawski and all of the classical music, and, you know, keeping up to date with things that were going on. But it really wasn't me. And I had this amazing experience where at university, I played keyboards in a Greek band. And we would play at weddings and tavernas and dances and things like that. And that, by the way, is where I realized, oh, okay, music can be in 11. It can be in 7. It can be in 15 or whatever. You know, it can be in anything. But what I would do is I would go to university and we would study, you know, Stockhausen Klavierstück. And we'd have a look at that and I'd go, oh, wow, this is really interesting. And everybody would be sitting there going like this, Stockhausen, like this. And then I would go down to the city and with my Greek friends, they would get out the bouzouki, and, you know, the drums would come out, and I would be at the keyboard, and we would start playing a song, and the entire hall would get up and start dancing. On the first note, they would get up and start dancing. And I had this every day, this contrast of music that was very much in the brain, and then music that was very much about life and community and social glue, you know, bringing people together. And so as a student, I was moving between these two things all the time. And then finally, when I finished at university, you know, all of that, it becomes a thing inside you. It becomes your identity in some way. And I slowly started to allow, this is me finally answering your question, by the way, I slowly started to allow the Greek side of myself to enter into the compositions that I was writing. And really the first clear example of that is the Concerto View from Olympus. So in that, I thought, well, I want to be free in some way. And so I allowed that in. And from that point on, I felt like I had permission. And I've done a huge amount of research. And now I have many very good friends in Greece that are the best musicians there. Really amazing percussionists, clarinet, canon, you know, lira, everything. And I'm totally in love with the music and the culture. You know, I'm not really a part of it because I'm an outsider, but yeah. It's been a big influence. And of course, once you dive into the music of Greece, you have no choice, but eventually you end up looking at the music of Turkey and then of the Middle East, you know, and eventually you end up in India. You know, you sort of follow the whole journey through all of these musics and traditions.
I mean, this is the very interesting thing also about our job, and this is also why we love it, because we can see so many different people, we can see so many different countries, so many different cultures. So going from this point, what you said, like that you're collaborating a lot with musicians, like what is the influence of the musicians you're composing for if you're writing a piece?
It's really a big influence. And you think about our relationship, how it's evolved over the last few years, right? So by the time I came to write Atalanta, I was aware of you and Akvila, right? I knew that you were a couple, right? And that meant a lot to me when I was writing the piece. And I thought about the two of you, and I thought about the parts, you know, wrapping around each other and moving in and out and so on, but being kind of together, but also a kind of warmth about the music. So Atalanta for me is a very kind of warm feeling piece, and it has great youthful energy, which is what you two have as well. So, you know, that's actually, if you think about it, that's a lot of influence on the writing. But if I compare that to a piece I wrote around the same time, which was a kind of digital concerto for Michael Burritt, who was also a good friend, a completely different feeling about writing that piece. But for me, if it's at all possible, I try very hard to get to know the people I'm writing for personally. Because for me, the value of this, it's really about the personal sharing that can happen through these great projects. So yeah, it's a huge influence. And so I recently wrote a piece for a quartet in Canada, Architect Percussion, really terrific percussion quartet for quartet and playback, you know, audio.
Yeah.
And getting to know the repertoire that they play, it's a very different kind of repertoire from what I normally write. And I thought, oh, well, actually, here's an opportunity to try something more experimental. And I went into areas with that piece that I normally would not have gone into. So yeah, there's a very, very big influence. I mean, the thing is that across all of these people that I'm describing, there is an amazing level of playing ability. That's the consistent thing, is that like I don't really, and have never really written for amateur groups or amateur musicians. You think when I was just out of university, I started writing for Evelyn Glennie. You know, that was my beginning of writing for percussion. So for me, that level was the normal level. It is the normal level. And that's why I think I've also been free in the writing for percussion to write virtuosic music all the time.
I think I speak for a lot of percussionists. We feel it. We feel it. It's always great. It's always hard, but the work is always worth it.
It's very, very good to hear that.
What we
Very
put
good.
in your music. So talking about Atalanta, like it is now like the main piece for me on my new album, and what you wrote last year, and it's definitely one of the eye catchers of the album. So people really just adore it. Like what else except of the relation between me and Dagville inspired you during the writing of Atalanta?
Well, firstly, often people don't like it when I say this, but it's true. Often the titles come after I finish the piece. You know, so I write the piece and then I go, I have to think of a title, because I can't just call it piece number whatever for vibraphone, piano, and tape. You know, that's so boring. So, and I know that there's a very strong value for titles, but what's very important to understand is that that title is not something, or in the idea around the title, it's not something I'm thinking of while I'm writing the piece. And usually when I'm writing music, I have to be completely free of any external ideas, and it's just the music. And so, for instance, with Atalanta, I can tell you that the way that it started was me at the piano with my two hands, one above the other, trying to find sort of cool patterns. And I come up with these patterns, and then I think I have to try and remember that so I can write it down. You know, I have to remember it, And then I go to write it down, and I'll write a whole lot down, and I'll go, oh, wow, they're all in 7. And I didn't think that at the beginning. I didn't think, oh, I have to write something in 7. I just start finding stuff. And, you know, for every pattern that I like, I will throw away 10 patterns because I don't think they're very good. So there's a process of getting material. And then I will take just usually, if you think of the first bar of the piano part in Atalanta, that's really all I started with. Okay. Just that one thing. And then I thought, okay, well, I'll loop it a little bit, you know, maybe 4 or 8 or something. And then I think, what can I double this with? And then I thought of the dulcimer, you know, that's in that piece. And the dulcimer, I would have sampled or tried maybe 20 different instruments as a doubling instrument. But then I found the dulcimer and the piano together, man, what a great combination. And I play with that. And then I think, oh, this is going to the moment where the vibes will come in. I can feel it, but I don't know how that's going to happen. And then it just goes forward very, very slowly in terms of a process. And then when the vibes come in, it has to be cool. Like it has to be a cool entry. You know, it can't just be, oh, the vibes start playing. You have to sort of shape it so that it's awesome when it happens. And then the vibes come in, and then there is this amazing, for me, jump in energy because two human beings are talking to each other and racing around each other. That's what I love about Atalanta, is it really is like you're chasing each other, you know, through this piece. And then it grows from there. So really the answer to your question is, I have no idea when I start. And I never do. And it's very tempting, you know, especially if there's a lot of pressure, like there's a deadline or stress or whatever. You think, I've done it before, I think, I'll make a plan. I'll plan the whole piece before I start. And I know it's going to do this and this and this and this. And that way it'll speed up the process. That has never worked for me. It's never, ever worked. I've always only ever been able to start with that first tiny bit of information. It's like Matrices Dance. Dun, 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 ba-da-da-da. That's all I had, you know, on the piano, just that. And from that came the whole piece. And that's why I think it's one of the reasons that for some people my music is attractive, is because it has this sort of organic unfolding where it naturally becomes the next thing. And the thing about Atalanta, though, is that because there was a backing track and because I knew what kind of players you and Akvila are, I kind of felt free to explore a whole bunch of things as well. And when I say explore, I don't mean like a scientific experiment. I mean, when I get to a place, for instance, we have all the changing time signatures, and it's kind of like in a weird 17/8 combination of time signatures. I'm doing that and I'm thinking, oh, they'll have no problem doing this. I can keep playing with this material. You know, I can keep playing around with it. And so it's really about, I think, at what level do I feel the restrictions are? And if that level is high, then I have all of this room to play. Yeah. So that's the answer. I can never give you specific stuff about pieces because it always starts with a seed. And essentially I'm like the gardener pouring water on the seed, trying to make it grow into something.
So out of this, I hear that you're trying, firstly, also when you're composing, you're working on the piano a lot.
At the beginning, yes, for ideas, yeah. And I'm trying more and more to create material at the piano now, because I find that in the pieces that I've done that, it's stronger. There's something about the material coming out of the physical playing. But I'm a terrible pianist. Well, not terrible. I'm a very average piano player. The problem I have with my piano playing is that because no one's heard me play ever, everybody thinks I'm really good. And now I can't play because then people will know that I'm not very good. So anyway, but I sit at the piano and I really love that part of it, working out ideas. And the process, like I did it with Atalanta, is that pattern that starts there, or the phrases that you play on the vibes when you come in. I will be writing little fragments and ideas, and I put them on little bits of manuscript, and then I have dozens and dozens of these things. And then I'll say, oh, what if I put these two together? What happens if this one comes after this one? And I'll go, not quite. What if I do them the other way in this order? And then I have a longer phrase, but then I'll add something else. And gradually it happens.
No, that's great. That's great.
Yeah.
So you were also already composing a lot with electronics. And I guess I am also not making it less, because I'm commissioning a lot of pieces with electronics, because I think we both love it to have percussion pieces with electronics. What are the things which are so interesting? What things we can extend in working with electronics?
Well, for me, the big thing about electronics is that the sound world becomes infinite. It can be anything. Now, I have a piece being premiered in a week, which is for 6 pianos and electronics, pre-recorded. And in that piece, you have a moment where the great creation myth from India, the book, the Mahabharata, there's a quote being spoken over the pianos from this, ancient. And shortly afterwards, there is the recording from Voyager 1, the probe that is now in interstellar space. It's gone beyond our solar system. And it's the recording of the UN ambassador saying, greetings from planet Earth, speaking like this. And these two things exist in the same piece, very close to each other. That's the thing about electronics, is that it gives you the opportunity to tell stories, narrative stories. It's like one study, one summary. In summary, there are these recordings in the background of like a city from far away. There's the sound of children playing in a playground. There's the sound of nature, just insects and wind and things like that. They tell a kind of story around the playing. And so they make these, like for me to write a marimba study with nothing else but just the marimba, I would find that really hard now, because there are people who can do that a lot better than me, firstly. People who are really good at writing for the instrument. But secondly, it's really like, why write a marimba study? We have the kind of repertoire now. It's really about what are the new spaces that we can go into.
That's really interesting. So what are your next projects? What you will have now? Doesn't matter if it's with percussion or not. I guess it will be still a lot with percussion. But what are your next bigger projects?
Well, I've been nearly full-time composer for percussion for the last period of time, and I still have some to go. I'm really looking forward to the project that we have coming up, which is the solo vibes in electronics and video. Very excited to get started on that. And I mean, I'll say this now, but I hate saying things like this on camera because I'll probably change my mind and I'll look stupid after. But the idea is that with that piece, I'm very interested in exploring very contemporary beats and maybe getting a producer to create some beats that I will use as the backing for the vibes. But anyway, that's next. And then still on the Fabian Ziegler composition schedule, I then have a double concerto that I'm writing for you, which I'm very much looking forward to. And I love how we have made a decision on the orchestration for that, to kind of pull it in, because so many of the percussion concertos, including ones that I've written, are just huge. They have everything. And it's really nice, the idea of pulling it back. And the way that, what I love is when you hear Bach on the marimba played really well, it shows you that the instrument is capable of real poetry. It shows you how special the marimba is. And so the idea of pulling it in, I'm very excited about that. And then I have smaller projects that I'm very excited about because I've just been doing really big projects. And I just finished a piece which is a quartet concerto, percussion quartet orchestra, backing track for an orchestra, which is huge, and live electronics, which is the first time I've done that. And that's one 20-minute piece with no breaks. Like, it's really a big expression, a really big thing. And I enjoyed that very much. And I have a piece coming up in 2 weeks, premiere here, which is for outdoors. It's 3 blocks of a city with over 300 musicians lined up down those 3 blocks, and a big sound system as well, all along the 3 blocks. And the sound is dynamic. So the backing track is moving all over the place, but the live performance is also moving through the live musicians with the backing track. So at one point, these 3 blocks, they become like a 3-note keyboard, and you play different notes like this. But, I think about these projects, they've been amazing, but it's a lot of work. It's so much work. And so I really want to go, what's the word? I want to go less broad and more deep into things. And I think the way of doing that is to pull back the scale of projects and to focus really on the subtlety and the detail of the expression. So that's what I've got ahead. So I've got a trio coming up for a fantastic group in America, which is for piano, clarinet, and percussion. I'm really looking forward to that. And then a solo piano piece with no backing track, nothing. So that's the one I'm the most scared of, because piano is also the worst instrument because it has all the best repertoire. Everything great that's been written, it's there. Yeah, so those are the things that are immediately ahead. But the thing for me too, just to add to that, is my real ambition is to get back into playing. I really want to play again. And I have to figure out how to do that in a way that works for me. So I'm trying to make space in my life so I can do that. And then the other thing I want to do is I want to go more into production. So I want to maybe create studio-based music that is not for performance, but it's just made in a studio.
So one last question.
Yeah.
Because I'm really curious what you think, like, our instruments, the percussion instruments are kind of new if you compare it with the violin or with the piano, as you said.
Yeah.
They're having a lot of repertoire, and we're kind of on the way to build our repertoire with great composers like you. And what potential you see, or you still see in writing for percussion? Like, is there anything you always thought, I want to try this one day?
Yeah, well, there are probably 2 parts to that answer. The first one is, for me, percussion, the percussion world, if we're talking about the sort of Western classical music tradition, the percussion part of that, to me, is the most open-minded, right? In terms of new ideas, repertoire, and what you're willing to explore with composers and with each other. That's really important. So we just talked about the electronics and why so much electronics. It's really only in percussion that I've been able to explore that. Because if I talk to you and I say, hey, let's do something and put electronics, you'll just go, yeah, sure, whatever, But if I say that to any of the other instruments, there will be this, oh, I'm not quite sure about how to do that, or I'm not so comfortable. You know, there's all this other thing that happens there. But with percussionists, there's a kind of openness and confidence about exploring new things. So that's really important to composers, hugely important. You know? And then the other thing is that openness isn't just for, you know, technology or instruments or musical style or whatever. It's also to do with culture. And I think that percussionists are the players that I have found the most open to working with their counterparts from other musical traditions. Like, I mean, other nationalities and other cultures. And so, you know, I've worked with so many different kinds of percussionists. And you cannot put two percussionists in a room with instruments and not be telling them to shut up after 5 minutes because they've started playing and something is happening, you know? And that kind of energy between, and the crossing of the border between the traditions and the cultures. And I think it's because there's a lot in common, you know, across percussion in the whole world. And so it's easier to find a common language when you get together. And so in terms of what I see as potential, for me, the biggest thing that I would like to see, and I would love to work in that space somehow, it's the cross-cultural thing with percussion. And it seems to me, you know, I know that there are a lot of universities now where you can go and study your classical percussion, you know, your snare drum and your marimba and timpani and all that, and do African drumming class or do tabla class, you know, do these other things. But what's missing from that are people who are tabla players coming there to learn marimba or snare, you know, so that there's this kind of environment where a lot of the musical percussion cultures are represented at the educational level, not just afterwards in the professional world. I think it would be amazing to be a percussion student and have, you know, a kind of genuine African percussion ensemble in your department, or, you know, tabla players there, you know, or people from Middle East with the dafs and the bendirs and things like that. Yeah, so I think that there's huge potential, and I'd love to explore it in my own journey of bringing together different percussion cultures to create new work. And a lot of the music that I listen to is actually people doing this, not just with percussion, but I mean, there's a group that I was listening to recently where there was a lira player from Greece, a kemençe player from Turkey, a tabla player from India. There was somebody from Syria, somebody from Iran, and they're just friends, these guys. They don't just know each other because they've been performing for so long, but they come together and it's very comfortable. But what they create is new. There's nothing like it because they're bringing together a unique weave of different ideas. And I think percussion is the best situated instrument to be doing that. So that's the really exciting part of the future for me, is that cross-cultural exploration.
That's terrific. So thank you very much for
That's okay.
very nice talk. It was very nice to have you here. And
Nice,
I just wish you a very nice day, because you're just getting started in your day in New Zealand.
Yeah.
So it was very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much. And for everyone out there which is watching this, follow up on John's website and all the social media which he's having still, because he's not having Facebook anymore. So check his Instagram for all the upcoming projects. And there is a website you can just get along for one day, because it's really so interesting to see all the different projects, all the projects you did. Thank you very much for your time, and see you at another occasion.
Absolutely, Fabian. Really nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.